Welcome to One Planet Conservation Awareness, and we hope that you've all had a wonderful Christmas despite these strange times. Today, we're going to be bringing you something a little bit different. We have a conservation mystery story full of adventure. We're joined by the founding members of the Saola Foundation for Annamite Mountains Conservation, who are going to tell us all about their work unraveling the story of the Asian unicorn. Lorraine, could you start by setting the scene and telling us about the location of your work and the Annamite Mountains?
Sure, thanks for having us on, Jordan. Merry Christmas. So the Saola live in the Annamite Mountains of Laos in Vietnam. So the Annamite Mountains are this incredibly rich, diverse, unusual chain of mountains that run along the border between Laos and Vietnam. There's areas of steep, rugged, limestone karst elevation, tropical montane, evergreen forest, just an absolute magical jungle full of species that actually, in many cases, only exist there and don't exist anywhere else in the world. So, and the Saola is one of those.
So, Bill, could you introduce us to the Saola, the main character of this story, and a little bit about your connection to the species?
Yeah, sure, Jordan. Thanks. So, Saola, it's not just a new species of large mammal. They weigh about 80 to 100 kilos. It's an entirely new scientific genus, and it was completely unknown to the outside world until 1992, and it was discovered in Vietnam during a general biological survey, and it was probably the most surprising zoological find of the 20th century. I mean, it blew the minds of biologists around the world. Nobody believed that an animal this large and this distinctive could go undetected in the closing years of the 20th century, especially in a fairly densely human populated country like Vietnam. We're 28 years or so after that discovery. We don't know a lot more about it. We know it's still out there. But this is the largest animal of certain existence that's probably never been seen in the wild by a biologist. We have a handful of camera trap photographs of it. We've seen some animals that were kept kind of in ad hoc captivity for a short time before they died. We've seen some dead ones. We're still getting very convincing villager reports of sightings of it. But most of what we know about this animal has come from talking to villagers in its range. Nobody's yet seen it in the wild, who's a biologist or a scientist. So yeah, it's this incredible mystery. That's in part why it's picked up this nickname as the Asian unicorn, because number one, it's an incredibly beautiful animal with these long sweeping horns, about half a meter long, and these beautiful white spots on the face. Plus, it's kind of like trying to conserve a unicorn. We're trying to conserve an animal that's very, very hard to see and very, very hard to find. The reason it's so hard to find is there's a general slaughter going on of the pursuit of animals in Southeast Asia for the wildlife trade, the commercial trade. This isn't about local people killing Saola for food or for subsistence. That's not the issue. It's professional gangs of commercial poachers. And they're setting wire snares and things by the hundreds of thousands of these forests. They're not targeting Saola, but Saola is getting caught up in the general, debacle. So the numbers are very low. It's also a solitary animal. It's not a herd living animal. And it lives in very dense montane forest and remote areas. So it's very hard to find. So we have a challenge of conserving an animal that's just very hard to detect.
And previously when we spoke, you were comparing to the Yeti, to the abominable snowman, of how it's kind of this mysterious being that people have heard of, or people have seen glimpses of, but really people haven't been able to see it in the wild.
Yeah, but I can tell you it's a bit different in a Yeti that I have seen a Saola. 100% sure. I spent about 3 weeks with one. In the late 1990s, when I was working in Laos for the Wildlife Conservation Society, there was a general who had central Laos had his own little menagerie. He put out a reward to local villagers if they could catch a Saola for his little zoo. And in January of 1996, they succeeded, and they sent a female down to his zoo, an adult female. And I spent 3 weeks watching her around the clock. I came to nickname her Martha due to a very unflappable person who worked for WCS at the time, because the Saola was completely unflappable. At the time, she was probably the most important animal in captivity in the world. This is the first adult Saola seen by the outside world. And she just had an incredibly calm, tame, gentle nature. I'm sure she was under a lot of stress internally, but boy, she didn't show it. She was just very tame, completely tame around people. She was very afraid of dogs, which was interesting. But around people, she showed no concern whatsoever. We don't know why she died. She was under the care of the general staff, and they didn't know anything about keeping a rare ungulate. It was probably something related to diet, but she started having stomach problems after about 2.5, 3 weeks, and she died. I watched her breathe her last. It was like a Good Friday. It was late on a Friday on a cold day in January in Laos at dusk, and she laid down and breathed her last.
And since that time, there hasn't been any more in captivity, or indeed no scientist has seen any since Martha.
Well, there was one. There was an adult male Saola caught by villagers in central Laos. And in response to conservation awareness efforts for Saola, they found it in their snare and they didn't kill it and eat it, which they would have done normally. They kept it alive. They actually built a little pen, I think, near the capture site in the forest, and they released the animal into the forest. And then they sent a runner down to the district authorities and the Lao government, like 1 or 2 days walk from their village. These district authorities then got in contact with the Wildlife Conservation Society that had a conservation project in this area. And WCS worked with the Lao government to scramble a team of Lao guys to go back up to the village with the villagers with instructions just to gather some basic information on the animals, some measurements, and immediately release it back to the forest. So this team got back to the village. It's now maybe 3 days since the animal was captured. They got back to the village at nightfall. They took some photographs and videos of the animal with the intention to release it in the morning. But in the morning, the animal was dead. Very sad. I subsequently went up to that village several months later and interviewed the hunters that had caught it. And they estimated that it had already been in the snare for probably 3 days when they found it. So, 3 days without water and that stress, even the world's best wildlife veterinarian might not have been able to save it at that time. Some good has come out of the animal, and that WCS worked with the Lao government to preserve the entire specimen of this adult male Saola, and it's the only preserved specimen of Saola we have. So there's hope, and we already have learned a fair bit just from having this specimen. So some good has come out of it.
So what are you guys doing to try and find more evidence that there is still a population out there? Lorraine, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the mission of your foundation.
Right, well, given the urgency around finding Saola in the wild and taking steps to prevent its extinction, the Saola Foundation are focused on fundraising at a large scale to fund really intensive field programs focused on Saola. And our technical director, Rob Timmins, is currently designing a 2-year study, which will be an unprecedented level of search effort for Saola in the wild in Lao. So we're going to mobilize teams of skilled field biologists and work with local communities and basically do everything that we can to identify where those few remaining individuals are in the wild. Now, we know we've had incidences of wild animals, of wild individuals, as Bill's just described. We've had a camera trap photo. The last photograph of a Saola from a camera trap was in Vietnam in 2013. And but apart from that, really, we're just relying on reports from local communities with which we've built up relationships over time, trusting relationships. And there is enough sort of regular reports that come through our communication channels to lead us to believe that there are still individuals out there waiting to be found. So a big part of, because we know so little about Saola, we don't actually know which methods to use that are going to be most efficient in finding Saola, right? So like, it's not like Samba or muntjac, other species that are much more common in the Animites, where people can identify their tracks because they know what their tracks look like, right? You can use your mammal book and have a look at the shape of the track. We barely have that information for Saola. We have a general feeling of what a track might look like and what a pile of dung might look like, but we don't have anything that's been properly confirmed. So we're in a process of having to rapidly expand that expertise and just those basic field skills and how to identify the trails of Saola as they move through the forest. And that's going to be heavily reliant on engaging with local communities who have that historic expertise just because of their time in the forest over the years.
So really pioneering, adventurous work. Bill, do you have something to add?
Yeah, and Jordan, I'll just note, well, it's true that the last Saola that was seen for certain by Westerners was in 2015. We have quite recent, very credible reports from villagers that have seen Saola just within the past year. When we know with pretty good confidence that villagers in its range are still seeing it, they're still seeing the animal, still seeing its tracks. So that really gives us hope that there is a chance for us to find it. Because the first step because there's so few Saolas left, whether you're going to focus protection on them or whether you're going to try to capture some of them for an insurance captive breeding program, the very first step in that is to find them. And as Lorraine talked about, that's really what the Saola Foundation is focused on now. And we're doing that a lot through partnership with villagers, because most of what we know about Saola since it was discovered in 1992 has come from talking to villagers, because they're in the forest every day. They know the animal much better than we do.
And Bill, you mentioned just now that the long-term goal is potentially to take some of the individuals and start a captive breeding program to boost the population numbers. Could you tell us a little bit more about this plan?
Yeah, so a lot of conservation organizations based in Laos and Vietnam, both Vietnamese organizations and the international conservation organizations like Wildlife Conservation Society and Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF. And I say we because I've worked for these organizations. We've put, as we should, a lot of effort into protecting wildlife in the forest. A lot of protection efforts over the last 30 years now that this has been going on. Unfortunately, this commercial bushmeat trade and traditional Asian medicine trade is still overwhelming the protection efforts. So while the protection has gotten much better, the demand and the pressure on the animals to the wildlife trade has gone up even higher. So some animals are, nearly ecologically, functionally extinct in Southeast Asia or in Indochina. Like, pangolins are getting to that stage, and some of the very rare box turtles that are valued in medicine. And what we've realized in the Saola conservation, world is that Saola is now so rare, and there is no site in the Annamite Mountains, no protected area in the Annamite Mountains where the remaining Saolas are still safe from this overwhelming poaching. And that, yes, it is a risk. It's a very high risk to try to take an animal that you know very little about and capture them and bring them into a captive setting for a captive breeding program. That comes with great risks. But it's pretty much the universal conclusion that the risk of not acting and trying that is much greater to the survival of Saola. The Saola is on its way to extinction. If we continue to do what we've been trying to do for the last 30 years, that trend is not going to change. And the last Saola is going to die in the forest, probably within the next 5 to 10 years. So this is a very urgent priority to start an insurance captive breeding population. And the other issue is there's a thing called in biology LE effects, where when an animal gets so rare, there's small population effects kick in where males and females can no longer find each other for breeding, or the gene pool is now so small that you get inbreeding effects and, deleterious, genetic combinations. And Saola may be at that point where even if or stochastic effects come in, one typhoon hits Vietnam and you lose half the Saola population due to some flood or storm in one protected area. And it's our conclusion that Saola is now so rare, it may be the most endangered large mammal in the world now, certainly within the top 3. Sumatran rhino is highly endangered, but at least you have 10 or so Sumatran rhinos in captivity as an insurance. There is no Saola in captivity anywhere. And it's our conclusion, even if with a magic wand, you could eliminate all poaching tonight in Laos and Vietnam, there's a high chance Saola would still drift to extinction. And when you make that conclusion, the only proper next step is to get these few individuals that are spread throughout the Annamite Mountains into one protected place in a captive breeding program and start getting them produced young in a safe way, with the eventual goal of having Saola in the wild, reintroducing them into the wild once the protection efforts have evolved enough where they can actually secure sites effectively against poaching. And we're really not there yet for probably any site in Laos, Vietnam, maybe 1 or 2, but there's still some progress to be made. And it doesn't mean that the Lao governments and Vietnamese governments and the international conservation organizations and the national conservation organizations, there's some really good ones in both Laos and Vietnam. It doesn't mean they haven't made a lot of progress. There's a lot of progress that's been made. We just haven't gotten to the point where we're confident that the animals are safe in the forest.
So these things come hand in hand, the captive breeding program at the same time as the protection of the forest and also trying to reduce the risks that are happening at the same time.
Right. And we're working what the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, calls the One Plan. So in the past, often what you had is one group of conservationists, often maybe based in the zoo world, doing captive breeding to save an animal from extinction. And then you had other conservation groups, working to save the habitat in the wild. And it's been recognized that this all needs to be brought together into one integrated, one plan. It's called the approach. And this is what the Saola Foundation is working to support, is the One Plan, which is overseen by the Saola Working Group of IUCN. And everybody's working towards this one plan now for Saola. There's pretty much universal agreement that this is what's going to be needed.
And Lorraine, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about how this one plan might impact and improve things for many of the other species in the Annamite Mountains as well. What kind of species and ecosystems are we working to protect here?
Well, the Saola One Plan, any work that is undertaken in the Annamite Mountains currently automatically brings benefit to the broader ecosystem, because it's actually, if you think about just in terms of global awareness, right? Very few people have heard of the Annamite Mountains. Everybody's heard of the Amazon rainforest, right? South America. If you talk to your average person on the street in Europe and the US, the UK, nobody's heard of the Annamite Mountains. So the Saola Foundation, we took a lot of care and thought into this and thought, well, we're going to actually put we're going to be one of the first organizations in the world to actually have the word Animites in our name, right? The Saola Foundation for Annamite Mountains Conservation. We recognized that there was going to be a challenge there because many people don't even know where the Annamite Mountains are, right? So a huge part of our mission is in changing that and driving forward awareness of the fact that this incredible region exists, and it holds a huge number of species that don't exist anywhere else in the world, right? The Annamite striped rabbit, for example, is one example. The Lao rock rat is endemic to the Annamite Mountains, and there's undoubtedly hundreds of species yet to be mammals. I wouldn't be surprised yet to be discovered within the Annamites. So any attention that we can bring to the Annamite Mountains is instantly of a broader benefit, not just to the Saola. Any capacity that we build through the course of our program, we're working really closely with local communities. We're hiring young, talented Lao field biologists. We're working with students from universities. All that's capacity building, and that capacity doesn't just disappear the second that the Saola program ends, right? Those people develop skills and talent and passion and networks of contacts, and that has a ripple effect right throughout, geographically and through time, right? So we are certainly, and then while we are very, very much laser sharp focus in the near term in fundraising for Saola and in finding Saola in the wild, our much, much broader, longer term remit, the Saola Foundation for Annamite Mountains Conservation, is to really look for opportunities within that region in how our work can benefit other species in other parts of the ecosystem.
So it's really the idea of umbrella species, by protecting one species, you protect the whole habitat. Bill, would you like to add something?
That's right.
Yeah, I just want to underscore what Lorraine said about the Annamites. So what happened when the Saola was discovered there in 1992? I mean, it was just kind of blue biologists. Then it was found in the Annamite Mountains. And then biologists started paying closer attention to the Annamites. And the string of discoveries there of larger new vertebrates, birds, mammals, turtles, salamanders. There's been, in the last 20 years since Saola was discovered, the pace of discovery of previously unknown larger new vertebrates is unmatched by any region of the world, maybe in the last 100 years, as there has been in the Annamite Mountains. And this is in addition to, endemic species that were already known from the Annamites. There's an incredible community of endemic primates like red-cheeked duglanger and white-cheeked gibbon that aren't found anywhere else in the world. The reason that this first survey went in to do a general survey of the Annamite Mountains in the 1990s, when they unexpectedly found the Saola, was because the Annamite Mountains are already known to be important for endemic rare animals. And that assessment has just increased since the Saola was discovered. We've found there's two new species of deer in the Annamite Mountains. There's probably a third one. I mean, we have camera trap photographs of one. We're not really sure what it is. And Lorraine mentioned a beautiful new rabbit. I mean, just all sorts of things. So this is independent of Saola, this is just a remarkable area. And any effort that's going to help Saola is going to help all these other species as well.
Absolutely. Well, it's amazing work you guys are doing, and it's really exciting to hear about it. And we're even more excited to announce that OPCA and you guys are going to be working together on some content that will hopefully be able to bring to you guys very soon, looking more in depth into the work and finding out how people can help. So guys, thank you so much for joining us and telling us all about your work. And we look forward to hearing more from you very, very soon.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thanks, Jordan. This has been fun.